Well, welcome everyone to Automating AI Actions with the Zapier MCP. My name is Anna Burgess-Yang. I am an automation and AI expert. I spend my days helping solopreneurs, freelancers, and small teams build systems and automation so they can spend less time on the boring stuff and more time on work that actually matters. I create resources like tutorials, guides, blog. I host webinars like this one. I also work as a freelance content marketer and journalist. I mostly work with B2B SaaS companies and write about technology. I'm a regular contributor at Fast Company, for example. Before I went solo, I was a tech executive at a financial technology company, and I was also the product manager there. So I have spent almost my entire career thinking about workflows and tools and how everything connects together. So what we're going to cover in today's session, specifically, what is an MCP? If you're not familiar with that and with how they work and are hoping to learn that during this session. Specifically, how to configure the Zapier MCP and configuring tools within that. It's kind of a two-step process, and I'm going to show that live during the session. And then we're going to look at some example use cases. There are so many things that you can do with the Zapier MCP, and I'm going to show very specifically 3 different ways that I use it with 3 different tools to kind of give you some ideas of how you could use it within your own work. And then at the end, I'm going to leave some time for a Q&A. So if you have questions as I'm going through this, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and then I'll pull that up at the end and answer as many as I can. So very quickly to get started, we're going to talk about what is an MCP. MCP is Model Context Protocol, which is a fancy way of saying it is a standardized way to connect apps that you're already using to AI tools. And so what that does is it lets you basically chat within your AI tool with apps. So, for example, you're working in ChatGPT or Claude, and you want context from something else that you're using. An MCP is the way to connect that something else so that you don't have to switch back and forth or copy and paste in order to get context into your AI tool. I'm going to say Claude repeatedly in this session because that's the one that I use, but the MCP basically works the same way, whether you're using ChatGPT or something else. It sounds technical. It's really not. It's very easy to configure and use. It's usually just a matter of connecting and putting in your credentials like you would for creating an integration with kind of any tool. I like to think of it as like an API, but for AI. So if you've used APIs before, it lets you send standardized data back and forth between tools. Somebody else creates that API and you just get to use it. That's how a lot of tools connect today. And MCP is just a new way of doing that with these large language models and AI tools. So now we're going to specifically talk about the Zapier MCP and what that does and how that works for you. So I'm not going to talk a ton about how Zapier works because that's kind of a different beast. That Zapier can automate workflows in the background. Basically, if this one thing happens in one app, another thing happens in another app. The Zapier MCP lets that happen within Claude, in my example. Within Claude, it can trigger a workflow. So it lets you connect your Zapier apps. Why does this matter? Tons of apps now have their own MCP. Notion, for example, has its own. Airtable has its own. Tons of apps are developing their own MCPs, and those are great. You can connect those, work with that tool. But not all of them do. Tons of apps don't have MCP yet, and who knows if they will at some point or not. So Zapier can act as an intermediary, letting you do things with these tools that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Or they can basically follow a specific workflow that you would define within Zapier. So that's the difference between the Zapier MCP and other MCP tools that are available. And there are thousands of Zapier apps available. So that lets you basically call a workflow within your AI tool. Really important that you're basically using natural language as the trigger. That's really different from how other Zapier workflows use, where it's like, if this document appears in a specific folder, this thing happens. It's a very specific in how workflows get triggered on the main Zapier. Hey, I need to add a task to Todoist, which is one of the show, and that will fire off the automation. I'm also going to show you how I use nudges. I have this configured in Claude so that it reminds me to use the Zapier MCP. It recognizes, hey, that's a to-do item. You might want to add that to your to-do list so that I don't necessarily have to make the outbound action. Claude will remind me, and then I can just confirm, yes, I want to do that. Really important is that each time you call the Zapier MCP, it uses 2 tasks. And Zapier's plans allow a certain number of tasks per month. And each time an action happens in Zapier, that is 1 task. If you use that's 2 tasks. So depending on your plan and how many, if you are close to your task limit per month and you start relying heavily on the MCP, it could push you over. I have a plan where I have enough tasks available. This hasn't been an issue, but I did want to call that out, that is a little different. So now I'm going to stop this presentation sharing, and I'm going to switch over to Zapier and show you how you configure the MCP. So this is the MCP server. It's a totally different side of Zapier. And it's mcp.zapier.com. I'm already logged into my account. And you can see here I'm already connected to Claude. You can connect to more than one MCP server. So if you also use ChatGPT, you can click New MCP Server. That's the first step. You can see Claude's grayed out because I'm already connected. I'm going to connect to ChatGPT, and that's it. It's now connected. That's because I already had my ChatGPT credentials entered in Zapier. If you didn't, you'd be prompted to enter your connect basically one time so that the MCP server is available. And now you can add tools within that server. The tools are server specific. So if you look here at Claude, these are the tools I already have connected: Google Docs, Airtable, Notion, Kit, Buffer, etc. And says 8,000 apps basically to pick from. The Zapier's entire ecosystem of apps. So to add a new tool to your MCP server to say, I want to use this within Claude, I have to click Add Tool, and I search. I'm just going to use Google Sheets because I've already got it connected in Zapier. And then you have to configure specific actions. So you might say, I want to be able to find a worksheet within within Claude. I want to be able to find a worksheet and work with it. I want to be able to get data out of the worksheet. And so each, you might want to create a new spreadsheet column. So within each tool, it's going to have the specific actions available, creating a row. And so I would say, okay, that's what I want to do. Within Claude, I need to be able to create new rows on this sheet. So you'd say connect. You'd connect your specific account and add the tool, and now it's available. So some of these you can see I have multiple actions configured. Google Docs. I have one that appends text to my existing document, and I have one that creates documents from a template, which is one that I'm going to show you. And you have to, the last thing you have to do before you leave is you have to configure the action. At this point, you've only added the action. You have not configured it. So then you select configure, and it confirms the account. It confirms the drive. It confirms the folder. In this case, I have it appending a specific document, not just any document. But I could let AI select a value. I could configure this, like only documents in a specific folder. You can lock this down as much as you want. For example, I could say I only want in Notion, I only want it touching a certain Notion database. I don't want it looking at anything else. You can do that. And that way you have control. Or if you leave it at let AI choose a value, then it's going to confirm with you, this is the one I'm supposed to update, right? And you would say yes. And so it's kind of doing a search within using the tool. So that's how these work. You'll need to configure each specific piece tool that you add. Then I'm going to show you real quick some configuration on the Claude side. So in Claude, it's going to be different if you're using ChatGPT, but in Claude, they call these connectors. And you can see I have Zapier connected. You need to make sure that you allow that. And then it will prompt you to enter your Zapier MCP server. That's a one-time thing. You won't need to do it again. It's just to connect it, and now it's available. You can then choose, do you want it to ask for permission each time, always allow, or do you want it to approve it? And so that changes the behavior for those specific actions within as you're using the Zapier MCP. The last thing I'm going to show you in the configuration before I get into specific examples is something that I set up in my settings, and I call this nudging behavior. So these settings are general and apply all over Claude, regardless of if I'm working on a specific project or anything like that. These are kind of global rules. And so what I have is how to use the Zapier MCP tool with different tools listed here. How do I think about this? Well, I use Trello for projects. I use tasks for Todoist. And so it's explaining, and then I have nudging behavior. If it sounds like this is a potential project, ask, should I create a to-do in Todoist? If it sounds like a task, say, should I create a task for that? And so it's guessing which MCP it should call from Zapier. And I use that so I don't lose track. I'm in the middle of something that says, oh, is that actually something you need to follow up on? Should I create a task for that? And I can confirm yes. That's not the only way to do it. You can certainly call things on the fly and just say, create a task for me. But this kind of helps remind me as I'm going through so I don't lose track of things. So you can set that up. And I actually had Claude help me write this. I said, okay, based on how I'm using this, what instructions should I add to my global settings so that you know what to do when I'm working? All right, so I'm going to go back to my presentation here real quick, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples. I got 3. And the first one is how I use the Zapier MCP with Todoist, which is my to-do list. And so, as I explained, sometimes I'll be in the middle of something and I will think, that's something that should be on my to-do list. And before the Zapier MCP, I would need to stop what I was doing, move over to Todoist, and add the item so that I wouldn't lose track of it. And this replaces that. The behavior happens all within Claude, within the context of a chat conversation. So I'm going to show what that looks like. This is a pre-recorded video because if you've used Claude at all or some of these other tools, sometimes they need to think a little bit and it's just kind of spinning for like 15 to 30 seconds. And I didn't want you all to just sit here and stare at a spinning computer. So I pre-recorded what the behavior looks like using my data and how I would use it in real life, but edited out that thinking time. So the video is much faster, about a minute long. So I'm going to go ahead and advance this. This is how I use the Zapier MCP with Todoist, which is my to-do list, to capture tasks while I'm in conversation with Claude. So in this case, I was talking about researching a tool that I'm using, and Claude picked up that I might need to follow up on something. So Claude prompted me to ask, want me to add that as a task in Todoist? And I reply yes. You can see that Claude has called the Zapier MCP and knows to use Todoist to create the task. Claude lets me know when it's done. And now if I click over to my Todoist inbox, you can see that the task has been added. One thing I'll add to that wasn't obvious in the video is you can actually use natural language just with Todoist specifically to say, add this task and make it due on Friday. And then that would automatically put that date in there for you in addition to adding the task so you don't lose track of it. So this is my next use case is for social media scheduling. I use Buffer for social media. And I have a ton of processes that automatically add social posts to Buffer that I then edit. This is a specific way that I can work on social media on the fly. Basically, in conversation, I'm working on something. I think, wow, that would make some good social posts. Let's go ahead and fire those off using the Zapier MCP. This is how I create social media posts based on a transcript. The transcript might be for something like a podcast I was on, or a webinar that I hosted, or maybe even just a conversation I had with another person. The transcript itself is already saved to my Google Drive. So to start, I just paste the URL of that Google Drive file here in Claude. And then I have a prompt that I need to create some social media posts based on the transcript. And to start, I'm going to have Claude write the drafts for 2 LinkedIn posts and 3 Threads posts using my voice and tone guide. The voice and tone guide is already created and attached to this project, so Claude knows what to do with that. And then I just send the prompt. Claude thought for about 15 seconds and searched from my voice and tone guide and then created the drafts here. I prefer to edit directly in Buffer, which is what I use for social media scheduling. It's easier for me to do that than to go back and forth with Claude directly in this app. So I go ahead and tell Claude to send the drafts directly to Buffer using the Zapier MCP. The language of what I described here is enough that Claude knows what to do. So then Claude thinks for a few minutes, and I can see that it's calling the Zapier MCP. Claude will do its thing in the background, and then it will confirm that the posts have been saved. For me, I have them saved as drafts in Buffer rather than added directly to my queue. So then I can click over to Buffer, and this is the drafts area. And you can see that these were created a couple of minutes ago by Claude. And the last example that I'm going to show is using the Zapier MCP with a Google Doc template. And so this allows you to work with a template that you have set up in Google Doc. And basically, Zapier will populate a bunch of fields, however many fields you have set up. And so I do this when I'm kind of thinking back and forth, planning something, even planning like a webinar is one of the examples that I do. So I'm kind of working through it and I'm like, okay, now I want to document what this is going to look like. And so I have it call one of my templates. This is how I use the Zapier MCP to call a specific template I have in my Google Docs, complete the template in Claude, and then save the completed document to my Google Drive. Claude accesses the specific template from my Google Drive and looks for the placeholders that I've set up on the document. Once I'm done with the back and forth, Claude gives me a recap of everything it's going to put in my document and then prompts me, asking me, should I go ahead and create the doc? Claude then calls the Zapier MCP to create a Google Doc from the template. Claude told me that the document has been completed. It's saved to the correct folder in my Google Drive. That's based on some separate instructions that I have set up. Claude also happens to know that I have a Trello automation set up to run in the background once a document hits that particular folder. That's a separate process. I can click on this document. Thank you, everyone, for joining the session. I hope that you found it helpful and hope to see you on a future session. You can check out written versions of the tutorials I create on my website, tinkeringwithideas.io. I also have a ton of free resources on Gumroad. I've got guides, worksheets, e-courses. You can check them all out at products.annabeyang.com.